With the return of regular season NBA basketball, each of the 22 teams had different goals they were shooting for within the remaining 8-game schedule. There are teams at the top like the Lakers, Bucks, Raptors, and Clippers that essentially have their place in the standings locked up and are using this time to shake off some rust. Then there are teams in that next tier that essentially have their playoff spot locked but are still battling for seeding. And then there are the fringe teams at the end, fighting just for a chance to play postseason basketball, and this is the tier that the Portland Trailblazers found themselves in. This has been a pretty disappointing season for Trailblazers fans throughout most of the year, and after being struck with injuries to several key players throughout the year, they did their best to remain within striking distance of the 8 seed. Now, after a few games since the restart, they are mostly healthy, all of their key contributors are back, and they look like they could realistically steal that 8th spot away from Memphis. A lot of the credit is due to players like Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, and the returns of Yusuf Nurkic and Zach Collins have definitely helped too. But there's one player in particular that has stepped his game up immensely lately by the name of Gary Trent Jr., and I believe this might just be the beginning regarding how good Trent can truly be. For the topic of today's video, we're going to be discussing where exactly Trent came from, what led to his breakout, and how important he can be because of what he brings to this Blazers team. Before we start though, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. Now, Gary Trent Jr. was certainly not an example of a nobody bursting onto the scene, because back in high school he was a highly regarded 5-star recruit. He was lighting up the high school scene, putting up 32 points per game as a senior, and he was even named both a McDonald's and Jordan Brand All-American. In the class of 2017, he was ranked as the 8th best player according to ESPN, and you have to keep in mind that this class had players like Trae Young, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Trent was ranked ahead of all of them going into college, so the expectations were pretty high, and it looked like he had the talent to be a lottery pick in the 2018 NBA draft. He committed to play for Duke in college, and because of the attention a team like Duke gets year in and year out, this only brought on more pressure and expectations, but with the amount of talent around him, it felt like he struggled to find a way to stick out much throughout the year. That season's Duke team was led by senior Grayson Allen, and then players like Marvin Bagley and Wendell Carter, both of which who would go on to be lottery picks, were also ahead of him in the pecking order, so while scouts were fixated a ton on them, Trent had a fairly underrated year. His role on the team was to space the floor and knock down threes, and with that being his biggest strength, he did it at a very high level. While taking a high volume of attempts from 3 per game, he knocked down over 40% of them, and while he did have a few stretches of streaky play, the positives definitely outweighed the negatives in this aspect. The areas that concerned NBA scouts, though, came elsewhere. Trent was an excellent spot-up shooter and worked very well moving off of screens to create a shot, but with the ball in his hands, he was underwhelming to say the least. He only shot 42% on all 2-point shots, on runners in the paint he shot 30%, and on all shots off the dribble, he only shot 35%, all of which are numbers that suggest the player just doesn't possess much ability to create offense. Additionally, he was in the bottom 5% of players at the Division I level as a pick-and-roll ball handler, so needless to say, his upside was very limited according to the scouts at the time of the draft. However, what those scouts and NBA teams didn't take into account is the work ethic a player has to improve their games, and ability for someone as young as a one-and-done freshman has to improve over time. And the prior evidence that Trent was one of the best players in the class, so in the 2018 NBA draft, he watched a ton of his former McDonald's All-American teammates hear their names called in the first round, while he fell all the way to the 37th pick and was originally taken by the Sacramento Kings before they traded him to the Portland Trailblazers. Obviously, being a second-round pick beginning his career in an atmosphere where the expectation is making a deep playoff run like it is in Portland, the minutes were never going to be there right off the bat, so Trent's rookie season was a bit of a wash, more with the focus being on development behind the scenes than it was on production on the court. Last season, he pretty much only played garbage time minutes and averaged fewer than 3 points per game on poor efficiency, so again, not exactly much to take away. Coming into this season, though, he knew he'd have an opportunity to prove his worth, but again, it wasn't something that was just handed to him. The Blazers made some questionable decisions in the offseason that saw them allow a good amount of their wing depth to walk in free agency, and a few other players were traded, and the only reinforcements they brought in were Mario Hezonja and Kent Bazemore, but Bazemore would eventually be traded to Sacramento at the trade deadline. To begin the year, Trent wasn't in the rotation still, with him only playing a total of 15 minutes in the team's first 8 games, but they were also starting to rack up losses, so in looking for alternative options, they experimented a little bit. They signed Carmelo Anthony not long after the season started to give the future Hall of Famer another opportunity to play in the NBA, but they also started to give Trent more minutes after his three-point shooting kept him in the rotation, and they proved to be pretty valuable. Fast forward now to the bubble, and if you've watched any of the Trailblazers games, then you've definitely seen the spark that Trent has brought to them off the bench. He's the team's 6th man and plays starters minutes, and through 3 games so far, he's averaging a very strong 18 points on 55% shooting from the field and a scorching hot 60% from 3. These are definitely numbers that won't continue, but on the season as a whole, he's shooting 44% from the field and 41% from 3, so the scoring efficiency is no fluke. As we dive a little deeper into his production though, we see even more evidence of drastic improvement that has helped him earn a big role on the team. We mentioned earlier that he struggled mightily to create offense inside the arc in college, but this year he's shooting a solid 47% on 2-point shots. He was also one of the worst pick and roll ball handlers in his season at Duke, but now he ranks in the 72nd percentile in the NBA as a shot creator out of pick and rolls, showing that he's not just a spot-up shooter anymore. In these bubble games, he's broken out step-backs, crossovers, and he's even been getting to the hole more confidently and finishing in the paint, all of which were things that scouts labeled as weaknesses of his that limited his upside. We've seen the Trailblazers ease a young player into the game early on and then have them break out in their second year before, as this is exactly what happened with CJ McCollum. Their development staff definitely deserves a ton of credit, the coaching staff deserves a ton of credit, but obviously Trent deserves a ton of credit for putting in that work. Being someone as highly touted as he was coming out of high school, he definitely could have grown frustrated with the way his professional career began, but he kept his head up and earned a spot in the rotation, and now he's the X factor that can help the Blazers make that final push for the playoffs. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below how good you think Trent can be over time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.